Hey, and we are live from Brisbane, from Queensland today in lockdown. So hello, everyone. My name is Santiago Moreno. I'm the marketing coordinator here at EMSA, Education and Migration Services. And today we are back with our senior migration agent, Mr. Shannon Semenico, and we will be talking about like something really important for migration, and is the state sponsorship. This has been from few years now the way to get permanent residency, so it's been super important. And now today we're going to talk about the states that are opening, what are the changes, how you can get permanent residency faster. So Mr. Shannon, how are you?
Good, Santi. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in for another EMSA Facebook Live. Like Santi said, my name's Shannon, and I'm the founder, CEO, and senior migration agent at Education and Migration Services Australia. And yeah, as Santi said, we're here today to talk to you about state sponsorship. I guess to start, just at the real high level, those of you that are here in Australia, it is going to be a bit more of a benefit, I think, being here in Australia this year. We have noticed a lot of skill shortages across the country in a range of industries, priority lists increasing up to 44 occupations now from, I think, where it was sitting at about 19 just before. So it's getting very, very good, I guess, or the need for people in Australia has been quite high over the last little while, which means there will be a lot more opportunity. Looking forward, immigration has announced the planning levels for this year, and there's 160,000 places as part of the migration program, which is the same as last year and the year before. The only difference is they didn't reach that number last year, purely because of COVID, and everything kind of got put on hold a little bit. And even better news is that what we've heard from immigration and for the government in general is that when we look forward to next year, like 2022-23, on the financial year, we're looking at that number increasing to 230,000, which is higher than even when it started at 190,000 back in 2007. So really good news, I guess, in the migration space. And what we're going to focus on today is more of that state sponsorship and how that all feeds into the overall migration plan as well. So New South Wales has reopened, and I guess a lot of stuff within the New South Wales migration program is still the same. New South Wales, when we look at, let's say, the 190 visa to start with, they have a lot of occupations. I haven't counted the exact number, but there's probably 100 or more on their 190 list. The thing when it comes to the 190 sponsorship in New South Wales is it's different to other states in that when you submit an EOI, you can choose New South Wales as long as you meet the requirements, which are that you are living in New South Wales for 3 months, at least as a minimum, or that you're working in New South Wales, living and working in New South Wales. So they're the two requirements at the moment. You need to meet one of those. And then the way it works then is it's on a point system. So whoever has the highest points and submitted their EOI furthest time in the past will receive an invitation from New South Wales to apply. If you receive that invitation, you apply to New South Wales. If they like you and they're happy with everything you've provided, then you're able to apply for the 190 visa. So that's pretty much similar to what it's been like in New South Wales for a number of years now. And I guess the main thing is, or the main difference this year, is because they didn't have a lot of invitations last year during COVID. They were only really inviting critical occupations, and it was a lot less than they normally do because the federal government immigration didn't give as many visas. What that means is that, for example, we've got some clients who are on that list, but we submitted their EOI like 12 or 15 months ago. And because no invitations were given last year, it means there could be a lot of people in that queue in New South Wales waiting for that 190 visa. And we don't really have visibility over that. Okay. So what that means is it makes it a little bit more challenging to know if or when you might receive an invitation in New South Wales for that 190 visa, because we don't have a means of knowing exactly how many in each occupation are currently sitting there in that queue. And obviously that would change daily. So if someone submits an EOI tomorrow and they have 90 points and you had 85, then automatically they could be ahead of you with respects to points. So that's kind of how the 190 works. I mean, great news that it's there. The other thing is we don't know which occupations. So some occupations for the 190 might be being invited at 70 points or 65 points. If the Department of Business in Sydney feels that that's an occupation that they really need, then you might be invited with less points, but other occupations might need more. So it's not just it's not like for like, you know, a chef with 70 points might be invited and an electrical engineer with 80 points might not be invited. So it's not just solely down to your points. And when you submit it, it could be down to your occupation as well. But the 190 is open, range of occupations in there, and there's no harm in submitting an EOI. As long as you meet those requirements of living in New South Wales for 3 months or living and working in your occupation, then you can submit an EOI and at least be in the running to win as well. But I wouldn't put all of my eggs in that basket because you just don't have that same level of visibility. So is it okay, Santi, if I talk about regional now?
Yeah. I guess with the 190, even people who are living in Sydney can apply, right? That
anywhere. The 190, like I said, it can be anywhere in New South Wales as long as you have an occupation that's on that list. And they've kind of on their website, you can see the ones at the top which are there. As long as you have one of those occupations, you can apply. But it's really hard for us as migration professionals to give you a timeline on when you may be invited or if you may be invited, just because there's not a lot of visibility, and also because we've had 12 months of no invites or very little invites. So, for example, one of our clients is a graphic designer. That EOI has been in there since the middle of last year, maybe even earlier. But because of that, now just coming back onto the list, we don't know if she was one of the last ones to put in an EOI. We don't know who's before her. So I guess there's just a few unknowns there.
And the process is not automatic, right? It's not like a computer. It's just someone actually looking at your EOI. It would be based on the number of factors, like the most points and things like that. New South Wales used to have a way that they assessed based on English level, working in New South Wales. They had a range of different criteria, which I don't see now on their website. It used to be there before. So it doesn't look like they're looking at that now. Maybe they are behind the scenes, but it is it's a bit more opaque. It's a bit harder to see exactly what's happening there. Cool. Let's talk about regional New South Wales, which I believe offers more opportunities right now.
Yeah. So, they've got a similar number of visas allocated for the 190 and for the 491. But the difference is that there's always, and there always will be, more competition for the 190 because there's more people in Sydney innately, and less people in regional areas as well. So most schools are in Sydney, or a lot more schools, universities, providers are in Sydney. So getting out of Sydney and going regional means that you're eligible for the 491 visa as well. Now, the 491 visa has 3 categories when it comes to New South Wales. And they kind of rank them like the highest, the second, and the third. The highest one is that you have been living and working in a region in New South Wales for a period of 1 year and working, and that's category 1. The second one is if you've studied for a period of 2 years in regional New South Wales. And the third one is if you're living anywhere in Australia, but you have an occupation that they want in that region in New South Wales, then you can put forward an application for that as well when they open. And they open it every 3 months or 4 times a year. So August is going to be the first one. So that's new. That's not something that we've seen before. So that enables people, let's say that you're living in Queensland, maybe on the Gold Coast, and they want your occupation down in Byron Bay. Then potentially you can apply and say, hey, I'm living here, but I'm willing to move to regional New South Wales if I get this visa. And then we can see if you can be assessed and I guess approved for that process. So that's new, and I think it provides a good avenue. Now, the other thing to note about New South Wales is that it's not just Sydney and regional. It's Sydney, and then there's lots of different regions like Illawarra, Far South Coast, Northern Rivers, Northern Inland, and they all have their own list, okay? So it's really important to be across everything that's happening there. So what we do with our clients is that we'll analyse all of those and see which regions they might be eligible for, and even apply for ones that, might not be as busy or as popular as others and might increase their chances of being able to receive an invitation. So when it comes down to that, it's, knowing which areas are good and have opportunities as well. So, they've got a similar number of visas allocated for the 190 and for the 491. But the difference is that there's always, and there always will be, more competition for the 190 because there's more people in Sydney innately, and less people in regional areas as well. So most schools are in Sydney, or a lot more schools, universities, providers are in Sydney. So getting out of Sydney and going regional means that you're eligible for the 491 visa as well. Now, the 491 visa has 3 categories when it comes to New South Wales. And they kind of rank them like the highest, the second, and the third. The highest one is that you have been living and working in a region in New South Wales for a period of 1 year and working, and that's category 1. The second one is if you've studied for a period of 2 years in regional New South Wales. And the third one is if you're living anywhere in Australia, you have an occupation that they want in that region in New South Wales, then you can put forward an application for that as well when they open. And they open it every 3 months or 4 times a year. So August is going to be the first one. So that's new. That's not something that we've seen before. So that enables people, let's say that you're living in Queensland, maybe on the Gold Coast, and they want your occupation down in Byron Bay. Then potentially you can apply and say, hey, I'm living here, but I'm willing to move to regional New South Wales if I get this visa. And then we can see if you can be assessed and I guess approved for that process. So that's new, and I think it provides a good avenue. Now, the other thing to note about New South Wales is that it's not just Sydney and regional. It's Sydney, and then there's lots of different regions like Illawarra, Far South Coast, Northern Rivers, Northern Inland, and they all have their own list, okay? So it's really important to be across everything that's happening there. So what we do with our clients is that we'll analyse all of those and see which regions they might be eligible for, and even apply for ones that, you know, might not be as busy or as popular as others and might increase their chances of being able to receive an invitation. So when it comes down to that, it's, you know, knowing which areas are good and have opportunities as well. The other thing with New South Wales is if you have a job offer, if you have other things that can add weight to your case, or if you move there and you start working, then obviously that's gonna look better for you as well. So making sure that you give yourself the best chance of success by at least showing genuine interest in the area that you're going, I think is important too.
Let's move on to South Australia, which is also another very interesting state for students to move there. So what's new and what's happening in South Australia?
So South Australia's always been an interesting one. Like South Australia's always been very pro, I guess, state sponsorship. They have had fluctuations in their lists on and off over the years. But what we've noticed, let's say in the last 6 months, because South Australia opened up quite heavily sort of earlier this year, before the 30th of June. And we got a number of invitations. I mean, we got invitations for enrolled nurses, chefs. I think we've got film and TV editors. So there's a big list in South Australia. And generally when it comes to South Australia, they've got a similar number for the 190 and the 491. I think they've both got about 2,500 or 2,600 places for each. And what they have is different criteria. So if you're a graduate in South Australia, then if you graduate from university, then you need to be working your occupation for a period of 3 months, at least 20 hours a week, and then you might meet the requirements for state sponsorship. If you're just working, let's say you get your 485 visa and you head to South Australia, then depending on your occupation, you might need to work 6, you might need to work 12, you might need to work 18, or you might need to work 24 months to receive an invitation for the 491 or the 190. Generally speaking, you have to work longer to receive the invitation for the 190 and less time for the 491. But again, we had an automotive electrician, I think, as well, or an electrician that we recently got in South Australia as well. And they were very focused. They moved, and this is one of our good stories. You know, they moved, they picked up from Brisbane and they moved to South Australia, and they finished their studies there, and they got their work and they did the job ready, and we went through that whole process. And it's just that, you know, when I spoke to them, and I've spoken to a couple of our clients that have just recently been invited to South Australia recently and said, how do you like it? And then one of them said to me last week, he's like, I you know, when I first moved here, I wasn't sure, but now I'm not going to come back, you know. So they've made a home there as well. So again, South Australia is a really good option. The other good option about South Australia, and a little bit of a hack that we can look at as well, is that you only need to be working 20 hours a week. So one of our clients who's a chef, has actually been a dependent on their partner's visa. But because they've been working 20 hours a week that whole time, was able to meet the 18 months, I think it was, of work experience to then be able to apply for state sponsorship in South Australia. So you don't necessarily need to have graduated your course to look at it. Whereas Queensland and Tassie, for their working list, you generally have to be working full time. In South Australia, they accept 20 hours a week, which is another positive and one that might enable you to get there quicker and not necessarily have to wait until you finish your study, get a graduate visa and are able to work full time. Yeah, so Western Australia is another one that's had a bit of a change of late. I mean, the graduate program is similar to the way it was last year and the year before. And I think that's good for states to keep it that way, because then it gives consistency, which means that if students go and study, they know that things aren't changing too rapidly and stuff. So it has a win for the education providers and a win for the people that are studying there and for the state overall. So in that case, students that study there, they need to study for 2 years. And in most cases, they need to work or have an employment contract for 6 months after they graduate. Now, the good thing about Western Australia with that is that studying English or studying vocational courses can count towards that 2 years. There's no need for it to be closely related to your occupation as well. So if you're an engineer and you want to go to, Murdoch University and study an MBA, that's fine as well. That 2 years can count. Maybe you can find part-time work experience while you're studying. And if you have that job offer at the end of it, then you can potentially apply for state sponsorship for that 190 visa or for the 491 visa there in Western Australia as well. So all of Western Australia is now considered regional as well. That was one of the big changes, that Perth and the Gold Coast were both considered regional probably 18 months ago now. And what that means is that if you study in Perth, you can still apply for the 491 or the 190, whereas if you're in Sydney, Brisbane or Melbourne, it's only the 190 there as well. So that's how the graduate list. Did you have any questions on the graduate one there, Santi, or that all makes sense?
No, I think it's very, very clear. And I think, as you said, like Perth being regional and having the possibility to apply for the 491 and the 190, I think is very interesting. And it's a state that, like the graduate list is huge. And as long as you have the job offer, then you can apply.
Yep. And so another really important one with Western Australia that I really want to touch on, which is super important now, is that they've also got another list, a Schedule 2 list. And they've realised that, not just people in Western Australia can apply, but people from outside of Western Australia can apply as well. And so what this means is if you've got an occupation that's on the Schedule 2 list that they've created, you may be eligible for the 491 or the 190 or both. And what you need to then have is an employment contract. So I was talking to one of our clients the other day who's not based there now. They're based in Victoria, but they have previously worked over there. And I said, well, if you can get a job offer, not a job offer, an employment contract with an employer over there that meets all of the requirements, has been trading for more than 12 months, and it's a legitimate employment contract for 12 months, then potentially you can submit an EOI for state sponsorship and be invited by the Western Australian government to apply as well. So it's another really good hack and a really important one that's that we're actually looking into individual clients and seeing if they've got any connection to Western Australia, or if the offices of their companies that they're working at have a branch in Western Australia and can offer them a job over there. It just might give us other pathways to kind of help people move from one state to the other in their residency journey. And it's really important to make sure that you've got that plan A and that plan B, and in some cases that plan C as well. So don't be looking just in the narrow vision of, I'm here in Sydney and this is my only pathway to residency. It's important to look outside of that if you want to give yourself the best chance of success. There are still states like Queensland that are closed at the moment and that are set to be reopening. We thought it was going to happen at the end of July, but it's obviously taking a little bit longer. And based on that, we're not actually sure what, I guess, is on their list or what the requirements will be. But historically, looking at Queensland for the last few years, for the 190 visa, you would generally need to have been working full-time in your occupation for a period of 6 months full-time and have an employment contract or job offer for another 12 months. For the regional visa, the 491, you'd have to be working in regional Queensland for a period of 3 months and have an employment contract for another 12 months. So my thoughts are that I don't think those sorts of things will change too much, because it, you know, from the Queensland perspective, it means that you're working in your occupation, you're employable, and the company obviously likes you if you're there, hopefully, anyway. And then they also had a postgraduate list as well, which was similar. You still had to be employed, but you only had to be working 2 weeks with an employment contract for 12 months. Or if you'd finished a PhD, then you didn't need the employment part as well. So the postgraduate list didn't really come back in last year, or we didn't see it much last year. But we're hoping when Queensland opens, hopefully fingers crossed within the next few weeks, that it will be pretty similar to that as well. But again, I would say with anything, looking regional is always better, because there is more places in regional areas as well. So you're just halving your chances at least if you stay in the city. Tasmania is pretty similar. The things that they have tightened up a little bit are around study and working in your occupation and things like that. Now, Tasmania historically had, if you're working 30 hours a week or 35 hours a week in an area that was deemed to be an industry, what that ended up doing was you probably got a lot of people that moved to Tasmania, worked in jobs that were not their occupation but were still deemed to be essential, and then trying to apply for state sponsorship. And I think it's probably good that you asked that question, Santi. One thing I wanted to highlight is that, and I was on a presentation with Martin, I think it is, that heads up Tassie state sponsorship a few months ago, and it's like they receive a lot more invitations than they have places. So not everyone that applies to Tasmania is going to be successful, because they receive more invitations than they receive more applications than they have places. Okay, so it's really important to make sure they've got a key study areas that they like, which I think is around health, technology or engineering, I think is in there as well. So they've got sort of 4 key areas as well that I can have a bit of a look at for you as well. But I think the thing to be mindful of is that a lot of people have moved thinking it's easy. If you have an occupation that's in demand down there, so for example, the last one we got an invitation for someone in Tassie that was working in their occupation was a 190, and that was in May this year. So it was only a few months ago, just before they closed. And he'd been working in his occupation for a period of 1.5 years, sponsored by a company down there. He was a chef, had a skills assessment. We applied for the 190 and he was approved by Tasmania, invited to apply. And in his case, the visa came through in 1 month. So he got his we started the process after his skills assessment in April. And by June, he had his permanent residency. So yeah, Tassie is a really good option if you have an occupation that's in demand, that you're working in your occupation, that it's a reputable business, all of those sorts of things. But they do receive more invitations or more applications than they do have places there as well. Northern Territory and ACT are also good states when it comes to places for migration as well. They have a little less places. I mean, the Northern Territory in total has 1,000 places, 500 for 190 and 500 for 491. The biggest thing with the Northern Territory, it's either studying there or living and working there as well. ACT has a number of places. They have been inviting a number of people over the last little while as well. They have kind of a big list, and they've got a matrix which is a little bit more confusing, which we can explain in a one-on-one meeting. But again, it requires a minimum of sort of 3-6 months living and working there to then be eligible to apply. Or if you graduate, then obviously you get higher points as part of that matrix as well. So yeah, I think we've covered off on all the states there, and especially the ones that we see more interest in and get more applications for. If you think this has been beneficial for anyone, this video that you know, make sure that you tag them and that they can at least watch it back and get a little bit of information later, because obviously with Facebook Live, it's really good for people who are online, but some people aren't online when we run our Facebook Live. So yeah, feel free to tag other people. And if you do have other questions, reach out through Messenger, but more so through, I think, the contact form that Santi dropped below. And that way, one of our team can get in touch. And for those of you that are around Australia that are in lockdown at the moment, wherever you may be, just wishing you all the best, stay positive, and we look forward to helping you here in Australia.